and thank Patrick Lemon, who is on this web conference today as well, and is heavily involved with this men's engagement work at the task force in Oregon. And you know, the work of the task force and the work that I did there involved coordinating a statewide project and managing a staff member who was doing that. And we started a men's engagement committee, a statewide committee. And as you can see, and if you go to Oregon, satf.org, you'll see a lot more. There's quite a bit of work going on. But the reason that the slide says direct and as part of a group is because before that I did a lot of work as with engaging men as part of a large group of folks who had various gender identities. So an example of that would be engaging pediatricians. When I was engaging pediatricians, I was engaging men as a part of that work. So long story short, as I did this work, I came to find out about and have a lot of experiences that really made me critically analyze the work that we were doing in engaging men, particularly across this nation. And these quotes that you see on your screen are just 4 examples of things that they are anonymous, but of things that I saw happening. And so, you know, there are things like some engaged men saying into a microphone at a large gathering and training that, oh, I knew she could do this. She had a runner's body. And, you know, complaints about the fact that male colleagues were getting paid 3 times what, you know, this particular woman was getting, who was speaking on the same topic at colleges and events and things like that. So it's pretty disheartening when I started to look into it more. And what I found that really, really is the core of my philosophy was this isn't effective. So if we're doing gender equity work and we have these kind of things happening as we're doing it, then it's really ineffective and it can be harmful as well. And so I started asking, well, why are we engaging men? That's a really essential question for me. And I found all sorts of reasons, anywhere from, oh, well, aren't we supposed to be doing it? And isn't it the only way we can conduct primary prevention, which is what, you know, everyone wants to see us doing, to, oh, no, you know, this is the way we're going to get at root causes, and this is about changing social norms. And so that brought up the question, well, how are we engaging men? And that's when I started really focusing on authenticity and accountability. And this question came up when I looked at what was being done was, is this idea of engagement enough? And what I found was that, especially in some local technical assistance that I was doing around engaging men, was that, you know, folks were able to get to the point they knew, okay, so I need to have men and boys at the table, but they didn't really know what to do beyond that, or they thought, well, that was it. This was the kind of the end of the work. Okay, we have men here. But again, my question is, well, then what are we doing? And so when you look at that, this is just a quote from a blog post about a community event. It's particularly about Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. But you know, I thought this was telling because I've seen more and more of this coming up, which is questioning, well, what are we doing and what are the messages that are being sent? So I had a lot of folks, once I did start talking about this more, telling me, as particularly on Prevent Connect, requesting that I write about this more and talk about it more. So I have. This is just one blog post that I got a lot of comments and people contacting me about. It's quite a simple blog post linking to some research as well about the glass escalator effect and the movement to end violence against women. But it really, really got a lot of attention, I would say. And it was something I'm finding people are really wanting to talk about this. And so that's just one example. So I happened to be in my Master's of Public Administration program at the time and had the opportunity to use the resources of my university to do my capstone project, which was a research study. And I decided to look at women's experiences with men in the movement to end violence against women. And so basically I frame this in a larger social context, folks like Flood, Casey, and more have really supported and have been doing work noting the histories of men's privilege, not only working in this movement, just being engaged as volunteers, as participants. And Michael Flood also, you know, he had a quote that was really powerful for me, and he was talking about men doing power to women, and not just, you know, out there in society, but in our own movements. And, you know, he said it's because of these histories of privilege. And so to me, that's sort of where I came from. And that was a big part of my literature review, in fact, for this study. I did a case study. I took some real examples from one organization, and I looked at the experiences. So these were men who were actually hired to do engaging men work. They had various outcomes in terms of their interactions with, their experiences with their colleagues who identified as women. And what I found was, I did look at individual factors, but what I saw was these were largely the same. You know, they were engaged from college on, and they had similar backgrounds. So to me, that was really inefficient. And I had to look for other factors. And those other factors had to do with organizational management, really, as well as societal factors. So organizationally, I found that the better outcomes were really correlated with screening, strong management, with training, and just more attention. And of course, I went into that more, but this is just to give you an overview. So there's a strong management piece there, a strong organizational dynamics piece there, as well as societal factors. And here I used the Prevention Institute's 5 norms that perpetuate sexual and domestic violence, essentially. And I did find differences here. So I found with the case that had very negative outcomes, there were very negative norms associated with that and that individual. And then with the successors, it was more positive because there were positive norms there. And I went into why, and you know, a lot of it has to do with society and with also the way the organization addressed those norms and really paid attention to how those norms were being either replicated or challenged when they needed to be challenged within the organization and the work. So this is a wonderful logic model. I have to say, I love logic models. I actually did post this on preventconnect.org. And essentially what it is it's taking you through a process of how I saw, after I did all this analysis, men being engaged, not just as employees, like I said, but also as, you know, volunteers or participants. And these numbers on here are points of intervention. And so just to make those a little bigger for you, this kind of created a new framework that I was putting forth. Oh, and my slides say to put the link. I'll try to find it and I'll send it out to everybody. Sorry about that. But you can see that some of the main points here, especially for the intervention, was organizational recruitment, you know, the application of kind of strong strategies for analysis, for screening, organizational monitoring, management, and positive norms. And for me, what this did was go beyond that individual factors approach. I think it's very important, and you can see it in here. It's definitely in here. But what I found was that was so insufficient if I was just looking at the individual. I had to look at the larger context in which that individual was engaging in this work. And a lot of times that is connected to an organization with a particular philosophy, particular management structure and type of practice and procedures and policies. And then again, as we all know, the larger community context and societal context. So I've done workshops. Every time I talk about this, I have a lot, and you can see them on the screen, of kind of points to consider when we talk about accountability. And we'll get into those as we have more questions and do more discussion. For me, the main thing is those last 2 that you see is purpose and impact. I really think that we've done a really good job saying, hey, well, you know, let's engage men. But what we haven't necessarily, what I'm finding, I think, done is really pay attention to what are those messages that we're sending out. Yes, we're engaging men, but what are we saying and how are we doing that? And also, you know, this idea of masculinities, of multiple identities, of challenging the binary, which is very hard when you're doing engaging men work, because it almost comes with this binary women and men perspective that we have to kind of figure out for ourselves. How are we going to deal with that? And I can say I haven't 100% figured it out, but, you know, I'm trying. I did want to give an example of one thing that happened recently. I had a friend who participates in Black Twitter. If you know anything about Black Twitter, it's fabulous. But this friend does identify as a Black woman, and had, you know, said around a lot of the issues that we're dealing with around racism and police violence right now. You know, basically, I'm seeing so many white people saying, you know, oh, I just wish I could do so much more. But I have so much privilege, and just privilege. And she basically said, you know, at some point, this is like bragging. What are you doing about it? Stop telling me you're so sorry you have all this privilege. And from a kind of, there's no hierarchy of oppression standpoint, I do have to look at that and say, you know, well, how does this relate? How does this relate to how we're engaging men? And from what I've seen, that's one of the things I've noted, is that, you know, we have been, over the years, we've spent a lot of time talking about male privilege, men's privilege, you know, a lot of how does this hurt boys and men? And I think that's great. But at some point, you know, I see a little bit of what I have kind of, you know, tongue-in-cheek called privilege vomit. And that comes from Twitter. That's why I called it that, because on Twitter we say, I had tweet vomit, which I'm sure is a lovely picture for me at 10 a.m. in the morning here. So I apologize. But that's kind of the point, is that what are we doing and how are we doing it? Are we just talking about, okay, men have privilege, you know, at some point that's absolutely necessary. How are we going to go beyond that and not replace it, but just go a step further? And so for me, that's my perspective, is what's that next step, so we can truly be effective when we're working towards gender equity. So that's my perspective. Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Ashley, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, before you mute your mic,
yes.
Did you, when you were sharing a moment ago, you said that some of this work lies at the Prevent Connect website. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is. So I have posted, I'll get those links if I can during this. You saw on that one slide, I had intended to put it in the title, and I missed that. So they are on preventconnect.org. You can go there. I mean, if you just type in the search box, engaging men, that will come up. If you just type in my name, all those posts will come up as well. But yeah, the glass escalator effect, some of, you know, some summary of, for example, that logic model and those points of intervention are up there. Mm-hmm.
Great. I want to make sure that the viewers, the participants, caught that. So thank you. That's very helpful.
Great.
Excellent. All right. Let's we'll circle back, and Ashley will contribute to some questions that we have later. I'd like to welcome Kate Bojan. Kate, if you want to get your mic unmuted, and you know, again, thank you, Kate, for participating in today's webinar. And if you would take a few moments to share about your work and your connection to this topic, that would be great. So, Kate, thank you.
So, hi there, everyone. My name is Kate Bojan. I'm with the White Ribbon Campaign based here in Toronto, Canada. Just want to say thanks to the organizers, Alan, Aaron, Jean, and NAMEN, for coordinating this webinar and providing some really great burning questions on accountability. I really hope this discussion today will really inspire folks to have these conversations in their workplaces and beyond. And I think we really need to keep up the momentum on this topic and really be reflexive all throughout to really ensure we're going in the right direction together. And just in terms of our discussion now, I hope that we can hold each other accountable as well. So amongst the panelists and all those participants online who are joining us, and hope we can really challenge each other during this chat and really mirror the kinds of practices we really want to advance. So just a little bit about me. My background is really in women and girls' rights broadly. So I worked with Plan International on a global gender equality training program. I've contributed to their So What About Boys report. Came out a couple years ago, still online. Became really immersed in this topic and really wanted to turn it into research and a thesis. So I would also be happy to share the thesis I completed on really how men's pro-feminist organizing is building partnerships and relationships with women's organizations. So in other words, really accountability, those partnership practices. And then prior to my master's, I worked in Southeast India and developing a workshop series on gender-based violence and promoting India's new Domestic Violence Act. So lived in Southeast India for 6 months. So just on a personal level too, as a female identified feminist in this sector, I selfishly, I really want to know that men's pro-feminist organizing is genuine, it's authentic. I was glad to see Ashley bringing up authenticity, and making sure it's really rooted in challenging patriarchy and reshaping power. And I do think women have a really critical role to play in conceptualizing and operationalizing accountability. So if women's organizations are really going to be partnering and engaging with men's-based initiatives organizations, they should really be shaping the conversation and dialogue. So at a professional level, so my role here is a project manager with White Ribbon, and it's really centered on building a community of practice, so a learning network amongst 9 organizations whom have obtained funding by our federal government funding partner status of women to carry out engaging men and boys programming. So these are organizations spread across Canada from Yukon to Nova Scotia. And we just had a quarterly web conference yesterday to really unpack some of the challenges of this work, what's working well, what are the promising practices in engaging men and boys. And we've also collaborated on a national evaluation framework to assess programs which engage men and boys. So I'd be happy to send this resource as well to everyone on the call as well.
Kate, thank you. Can you hear my voice?
Online can also share how they're both thinking about accountability and actually being accountable as well. So yeah, I just wanted to keep a short intro.
Kate, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Kate. And again, Kate, we will circle back with you and with Ashley momentarily here. Want to welcome Oswaldo. Oswaldo, if you would kindly unmute your audio, and would like to welcome you to our panelists today. And if you could start by sharing a little bit about your work and also some background in your connection to this topic for today's discussion. So welcome, Oswaldo.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this webinar organized by NAMEN. I am working here in the Global Secretariat of Men Engage, the Men Engage Alliance, which NAMEN is part of the alliance, representing the North American regional network. Here in the Global Secretariat, I work as co-coordinator of the alliance, and I am from Nicaragua, Central America, and from Nicaragua, I've been working also during the last 20 years before joining Global Men Engage almost 2 years ago on this field, on engaging men and boys for gender equality. And this is quite related to the topic, to the connection to the topic of accountability, because actually my involvement with this work for gender equality and particularly for ending violence against women and girls come from the impetus, the vision, the organizing capacity of feminist women in my country in particular, who created this movement, not only in Nicaragua, of course, but everywhere. And they were the ones who introduced me and introduced other men in this work, in realizing that this is also a social justice issue, so critical, so central for reaching social justice for everyone. And so women open in my country, Nicaragua, women open the doors for men to participate in this work, in this struggle against gender oppression. And they were the founders, and they had the leadership, of course, and no wonder why. They were they are the experts of what happened with gender oppression. Of course, we women also pay a price for the oppression of women, for sexism and patriarchy, but of course it's not the same as the historical, pervasive, systematic experience that women experience. And that's why they recognize first the need to politicize and to create a problem, a social problem regarding the way we are organized in terms of genders and the type of relationship that we have. And so having this leadership of women was a very important experience for me and for other men, because we have to practice the fellowship. I mean, if women have the leadership in this struggle, we have to practice the fellowship, and that's something that we are not socialized to do as men. We are socialized to be the leaders, and that women and others follow us. And so this was, and this is, I think, something very important to remember. As in Delhi, one month ago, we had this global symposium in Delhi, the Men Engaged Global Symposium, in a panel about accountability. We share with other colleagues. Michael Fogg was mentioning that we are not, as men, socialized to be accountable. I think this is also another important thing to remember. We are, as men, part of our privilege is that we don't have to say where we are, where we are going, what we did, because we are the rulers. I mean, in the cultural ideals of the role of men, we don't have to provide any account, any report about our doings, and so this is being accountable is very critical for that regard, for our work. And when we started this work in Nicaragua 20 years ago, since we were invited by feminist women to be part of this efforts, our activities were in direct coordination with women's rights organizations, with women's rights advocates. We supported, we joined their initiatives. For instance, in Nicaragua, the first law against domestic violence was in 1995, 1996, around those years, in the middle of the 90s. And of course, were women's and the Women's Network Against Violence who took the lead in proposing a law, in lobbying and in creating a public campaign, and the men who were part of this effort joined this initiative, and also worked on collecting signatures for supporting this new legislation. We joined different public protests that women organized to denounce men in position of powers because of their involvement with questionable behaviors. And we also reach out to other men from communities where feminist women were working with women, and they asked us to reach out in the same communities in which they were working. So we were working quite together, and we listened to their criticism as well. We started as a men's collective, doing some personal sharing about how machismo, how patriarchy has damaged us as men in our socialization. We spent almost 6 months in this bi-weekly, I mean, every 2 weeks meetings, group reflections among men. And at some point, some of our feminist friends told us, what's going on with you guys? I mean, you have been in this meeting, that's okay, but you need to get out of that clandestinity that you still have there and reach out to other men and in the communities. And that was a right criticism. I mean, we needed at some points start this safe space for reflecting about our own experiences as men, but there was a time, there was the need to also reach out to other men, and this kind of criticism really helped us. And we then, after that, we organized the first public event as a collective of men's committee to end violence against women. And from that, we started reaching out to other communities, organizing workshops, joining campaigns, and these other activities with women's rights organizations. So that was as I mentioned before, the origin of my involvement in this work. It's very linked to being accountable, to really to listen and to maintain a dialogue with feminist colleagues. I would say that nowadays the practice of accountability is more challenging because now men are not just joining women's initiative, but also men in this field are also founders of organization and network, are also expert in the field of gender. In Nicaragua, for instance, by the year 2000, we created our own NGO as Men Against Violence, and we became the national expert. And we started providing technical assistance and consultation to other organizations around how to work with men and boys for preventing violence and for promoting gender equality. And currently, there is the possibility that young men and young women join this field, join this work, guided only by men, reading only men's work, joining only men's led organizations, and this is not this is not at all a bad thing. It's just something to consider as new challenges that when people from my generation joined this work 20 years ago, we didn't have this challenge, and in terms of accountability, of remaining accountable to women's right, to the women's rights organizations in particular, because these men that now join these organizations now might feel less prone to an accountability towards women's organizations. They might have a harder time even listening and understanding feminist women's perspectives. Some of them might not be accustomed to hear directly to women's testimonies and experiences as we were more in that before. So it's something that we have to purposely include in our structures, in our events. And the Men Engaged Alliance, the Men Engaged Network that I work for, was created in 2004, and I would say this is one of the main functions of Men Engaged, actually to provide this structure, this system, this culture of accountability, and realizing that now across the globe there are many initiatives, which is good, something to celebrate, all these initiatives for engaging men and boys and men's actions for gender equality, but at the same time there is a risk on this, and I think Ashley's reflection presentation reminded us that about the risk of men becoming leaders in this field. So I think we as Men Engaged, we are providing an important platform to set high standards of pro-feminist work, to support each other, to hold each other accountable, to be consistent to our declared principles. And I would like to share a little bit more about how in concrete ways we are, as Men Engaged, promoting accountability within our networks in the following rounds.
Oswaldo, thank you for sharing your thoughts at this time. So Let's see. Hang on one second. So actually, Kate and Oswaldo, thank you. There's so much rich content there. I just some housekeeping things that I'm thinking of here with regards to this webinar. I want our panelists and also our viewers and participants today to know that this is being recorded, and there'll be a link that will be available to click onto, and you'll be able to go back and re-listen and revisit the comments, the opening comments that our panelists have made here. So this is being recorded. Also, too, in the question box, which I think initially I may have shared, that was in the upper right-hand corner, or lower left-hand corner or right-hand corner. I can't remember which I said, but I think it might be, as viewers, it might be in your upper right-hand corner. Anyway, where you see the initials Q&A, please feel free. Some of you have already done so. Please feel free to ask a question. And I think I may have inadvertently canceled one of those questions. Michael Shaw, if you hear this, your questions are still valid, and we'll circle back and make sure that we try to get to those questions at the end. On the screen, what you see here are some additional questions, actually questions that we asked panelists to consider and think about prior to the webinar today. But I wanted just to go back and circle back to the very first question again, and then ask the three panelists, Ashley, Kate, or Oswaldo, if you would add anything on top of what you've already shared or said. So the very first question here: what do you expect in terms of accountability from men and men's engagement organizations on a philosophical level, as well as in terms of concrete actions and policies? So when you think about men's engagement organizations, what are some of the expectations, philosophically, but also in terms of action and policy that you would add to what you've already shared thus far? So I'll open it up to the panel to feel free to unmute yourself and share to this question here, this very first one, this first bullet.
Okay, this is Ashley. I'll go.
Thanks, Ashley.
I could answer this in many, many ways. I think one of the main things for me is that term accountability, and the term really authenticity. Okay, both the terms. I think that it's so important. And I guess we would have to have an operational definition for authenticity so we could measure it and know all how to prove something's authentic. But if you don't believe in gender equity, frankly, I don't want to see you doing it. I had this really great experience at a training I did about this, and I asked the audience, I was taking them through a process of identifying how they're being accountable and to whom. And an executive director of a local organization in another state said, frankly, I have to be accountable to my board. And I appreciated that. I think there were some groans in the room because everyone wanted to say, I'm accountable to survivors and to women and girls. And that was great to hear. But this person was being honest. And to know that and to acknowledge that up front, I think is absolutely essential. So if your board is who you have to be accountable to, that's going to shape the whole way you do engaging men work. And then, I can't provide the answer, but then it's up to you, how you're going to do that, if you feel comfortable doing it, if you're able to work in accountability to survivors, which hopefully you would be able to do. But I think it's that honesty. That's what it takes. And it's hard to say, basically, you have to believe in gender equity. But, I also say that I expect to see those who identify as men doing this work. I expect to see people who identify in every way doing this work. And I particularly want to see, women and folks who identify in ways other than as, cisgendered men, be put in positions of leadership. I think that's one of the things I can, I was going to answer one of the other questions about CalCASA and how we do that, but it's about acknowledging and truly believing that women can do and women can lead efforts to engage men. I've seen a lot of programs that say things like, well, we can't have you, and I've been told this myself, you can't go talk to men, they're not going to listen to you. And my answer is, frankly, well, they should. And how are we going to change that social norm if we continue to go along with it, essentially? So my answer.
Thank you, Ashley.
Great, thanks for your reflections, Ashley. I identify a lot with kind of what you mentioned as being a female-identified person in this sector, and knowing that we do have an important role to play in shaping the dialogue and the sector. So I also just wanted to be clear that White Ribbon, I guess, could be classified as a men's engagement organization. We're focused on gender equality and violence prevention. So we're not, a women's organization per se. Our focus is male engagement. So I'll be speaking from this perspective. And I really commend the coordinators of this webinar for really honing in on what are women's organizations saying on accountability. So at White Ribbon, we're really committed to really enhancing how we articulate accountability and how it's fostered really with our diversity of women's organizations and our partners. And I think there's maybe some danger in claiming that you have it all figured out. And regarding accountability, I think it's a really continuous journey and process of communication with diverse women's organizations. So just in terms of some concrete strategies we're using, so we're really, clearly positioning our politics and supporting diverse women's movements and feminist principles. So, and I think what we've seen from a lot of men's rights groups is, a lot of smoke and mirrors, murky terminology that's really kind of based in male supremacy and men's rights. So really speaking out against that. And I think just in the social media space, there's incredible opportunity to, promote discussions on feminist blogs, articles, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, really bringing those stories to the forefront and highlighting those. And I think maybe this is a philosophical level, but to never lose the focus of preventing gender-based violence, and addressing social justice and gender inequities, and to really recognize intersectionality. So, and really recognizing, all the components and the challenges, for Indigenous women, trans women, sex workers, trafficked women, young women, the effects of poverty, unemployment, disability, age. So to really work from intersectionality analysis. Another strategy is really going back to, authentic, sharing in the planning and decision making in partnerships with women's organizations and programs. And I think also with concrete events. So just recently we've had our What Makes a Man conference mid-November. And we've had numerous women-only panels, and really the majority of women were moderators and facilitators. We also had a really large focus on the survivors of violence. So I think in the events we do, we take it really seriously in how we can really focus on survivors of violence and women's perspective, diverse women's perspectives.
Thank you, Kate. Oswaldo, do you have anything you'd like to share with regards to that first bullet?
Well, I completely echo what was Ashley and Kate mentioned. Totally on the same page. I also would emphasize what Ashley said at some point regarding modeling equitable power structures. I think that's a very important point, and not just the equitable power structure, but equitable power practices. I mean, our practices of power within our organization, our networks should be a reflection of our ideals of gender equality and social justice in general. I would like to add at this point, trying to move toward the more concrete ways in which this accountability is put in place, is that in Men Engage at this moment, we are around more than 600 organizations, and 20% of these organizations, so almost 200, are, I'm sorry, 20% is a fifth, so more than 100 organizations are women's rights organizations within Men Engage. Also in the steering committee bodies, the steering committee of Men Engage at regional levels and at global level. I'm sorry, because at regional level it varies, but at global level, 30% of the members of the steering committee at global level are representing women's rights organizations, and a few of them are women who are in these governing bodies of Men Engage. Actually, in the Global Secretariat, where I work with the full-time Global Secretariat staff, we are co-coordinating the Global Secretariat with a female colleague, with Johnny and myself. So we're trying also to model this partnership, this co-leading with men and women in the leadership position of Men Engage. And hopefully in the future we can also see other important groups represented in the leadership of Men Engage, like transgender folks and from other also backgrounds. So we are trying to be consistent with that. Of course, our ideals are more ahead than our current state of affairs, but there is a vision, there is a commitment, and I would like to say that there are 4 tools that we have in Men Engage, in Global Men Engage, for helping us in putting in practice our commitments. I would like to show this visual. You cannot start. Okay, can I do now? Then show the. Can you see this?
Oswaldo, you should see at the bottom, Oswaldo, you see where it says in green, share screen at the very bottom?
Right, I did that.
Okay.
Share screen, okay.
Here we go.
I'm sorry for the, is it? Are we on?
It's almost loaded, Oswaldo. Okay. Yep. Here you go. Thank you.
Thank you for helping us. So as you can see, we are trying to support our commitment using these instruments. Number one is our Memorandum of Understanding that starts precisely with our core principles. Accountability is basically an ethical commitment to really work in partnership and in strong coordination and communication with folks from the oppressed backgrounds, and that's why it's so important to have clear what are our principles, where are our principles, what kind of philosophy and world vision our principles embrace. The Global Code of Conduct is another instrument that we have, in which we try to be more specific about specific behaviors that we expect from members. And also we developed standard, more specific accountability standard and guidelines, how to put that in practice within our organizations. And we also developed a training toolkit, how to promote this conversation, this analysis, these reflections, and how to incorporate this through the use of these training sessions. And I want to add at this moment that the the process for creating these instruments are as important for me as the document itself, the tools itself. The fact that we are committed to develop these structures and these systems, and that we discuss these, we engage our members in these discussions, are very important, because what we want at the end is a culture of accountability and a real internalization of living our principles. These are just tools. These are just means for reaching to that. So if there is time, I would like to share more in specific what is the content of each of these 4 instruments. But I wanted to say that we need not just to say and include this language in our discourses or interviews or documents, but we also need to have this concrete practice and also share how are we doing with this guidance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Oswaldo.
Sure.
Panelists, so one of the questions, or I should say, during your comments, a question was posed with regards to where does racial accountability fit into this discussion? Accountability, social justice, these were examples and themes that were kind of laced during your response to this question. So to Michael Shaw's question about racial accountability and men's accountability, and intersectionality, what comments would you add to what you've already said, but with the perspective of thinking about race? Anybody? Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll go again. Well, I want to bring up, this is where Calcasa's work, I think, really can answer this question. One of the projects we have is called the LEAP project, and I believe it stands for Leadership Enhancement Advancing Professionals, LEAP, L-E-A-P. And, that's a project that is about women of color's leadership. And so it does training and some coaching, and really focuses on advancing women of color in leadership and management positions in this movement. And, to me, that's a really concrete example. This is, a project that works. It's focused on women, right? It's focused on women of color. And yet to me, it obtains our goals of engaging men as well. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but when we're talking about men's gender equity efforts, to have something like this, where we're really preparing women of color for leadership, we're acknowledging the injustice, the inequity that's there. Not only are we making that link to race, but we're also making the link to the fact that when we do see men of color in leadership, they're often in leadership over women of color, right? And so, it's this, really, I just keep doing this with my hands, and I know some of us probably use the term intersectionality multiple times a day. I can be guilty of that. But to me, that's just one example, is that it's absolutely essential. And if we don't do it, that's ineffective. And that's what I keep going back to. It's not going to be effective. That's not the reality of people's lives. I said that at a training recently when they were asking about, or I think some funders were saying, why is this idea of intersectionality among identities and stuff, it really seems like everyone's really interested in that. And I said, the answer is because that's the reality of people's lives. And so that's how we're going to be effective.
Ashley, thank you. Kate or Oswaldo, would you have anything to add to the idea of racial accountability before we go on? I'll pause just a moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ashley just said. I think I'm guilty of the same thing, of saying intersectionality too many times. But at White Ribbon, we really do adopt a diversity and inclusion lens to men and masculinities. So it's not just one, white heteronormative masculinity. We really need to unpack it with intersectionality, so shaped by race, class, sexuality, age, ability. And we try and really foster safe and challenging spaces for male-identified youth to make those connections to gender and their own lives and how they live it out, however they locate themselves. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Thanks, Kate.
I would like to say that we have the commitment to be accountable to all the social groups who have been historically marginalized, discriminated in different ways, based on all these markers of different social markers: race, gender, sexuality, nationality, religion. I mean, we know this might vary from one context to other, but we know that there are groups who historically, systematically have been oppressed and discriminated, and our main accountability is toward these groups. I would say, if we are committed to social justice, and also within our network and organizations, we have to be very mindful of how represented or underrepresented are each of this group and this variety of this part of the human diversity. Of that, of representation in our organization, and also the relationship, the actual power, the actual influence that and the voice, the use of their voice, and from each of these groups in the same room, in the same organization, in the same initiative. That's very, very important. And we live in a world that is patriarchal, there is white supremacist, there is sexist, there is based on class inequalities, and that's also is permeated in our organizations, and it's part of the struggle. I would say we have a struggle internally and also externally, and the more we can transform our practices internally, the better we can influence to transform society as a whole. So yes, raise accountability, of course.
Oswaldo, thank you, and Kate and Ashley as well. I'm looking at the time here, and we have about 20 to 25 minutes left for this webinar. And if the panelists will indulge me, looking at the other questions and some of the themes that come out of that, if because the participants on this webinar come from a variety of organizations and also backgrounds in connection with those organizations and their own individual philosophical thinking and attitudes around this, panelists, could you think about the policy level and maybe share some of the concrete things that and may repeat from previous conversations or previous comments made earlier, but at the policy level, what are some takeaways that you and your organizations have realized or conceptualized with regards to men's accountability at the larger policy level? And then I'd like to finish those conversations this afternoon with the talking about some of the takeaways of specific concrete examples. One, for example, Oswaldo, a question with regards to the toolkit, and Kate and Ashley, some of the training that you provide. So we can get more specific towards the end of this webinar, but could you think and frame for us some of the things conceptually at policy level that you would want our viewers to take away from today's webinar? From your own experiences and practices with your respective organizations?
Well, Alan, are you looking for more of a policy as in like federal type policy or organizational policy or both?
Right, capital P or small letter P, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I mean, I think, you know, as I'm looking at this second bullet, I think it's probably more of the smaller P. You know, I think, because I think the policies, practices of our organizations, but also of maybe the more, you know, local and state authorities and governing bodies, is maybe closer to us in terms of our own, you know, maybe our own work. So maybe federal policy or national policy, maybe a different discussion, but I'm thinking more about within your organization, so small letter P policy, if that makes sense on that second bullet.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead again. For me, I mean, that's what I've done a lot of work around, is this organizational policy perspective. And again, you know, always trying to operationalize things, make them more concrete. But essentially, for me, this is about the management approach, the way the organization is managed, is run, and who's in the position is essentially what's going to impact how effective we are, especially when it comes to engaging men and to gender equity and men's engagements in that. I think, you know, what my research showed was policy-wise at an organizational level, there's a lot that is necessary at the kind of the screening, the recruitment, the management, even the attention to staff levels. And so it's really easy. I think I loved Kate's point about kind of just throwing words out there and saying the things everybody knows are supposed to say or wants to hear. So absolutely, I think that the policy should be put in place, particularly around having very strong, very intentional screening and management and evaluation, which I believe that every nonprofit organization and government entity should have. And at the same time, there's the practice piece. So it's how do we practice what we're preaching? I guess that came up in my mind. And how do we really implement what we have written in policies and those great, wonderful words and concepts that, you know, we have written down? I think there needs to be some sort of function, and I don't know if maybe, you know, Oswaldo might have this as a concrete example, or someone else might, but there has to be some way that we hold ourselves accountable to those policies. So we can write them up and they can sound great, but if two things: one, we're putting people in positions that are going to not follow those policies and not be consistent with them, and then two, if, you know, we're getting away from them, if they're a name only, if we're not reviewing policies. I mean, a lot of this is, you know, everything I've learned about nonprofit management and what should be taking place or what's considered best practices. If we don't do that, if we're not really thinking about kind of internal accountability, then I don't know how we can expect that external accountability, and for, you know, folks outside our movement and outside our organizations to be doing this work and to be doing it well.
Thank you, Ashley. Kate or Oswaldo?
Okay, I can't continue. I need to again share the screen. I'm clicking the share screen button, but it's not yet. Now let's see. I'm sorry for the learning curve that we are using here. Is it now?
There you go. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, regarding policies, I think this is exactly what we are trying to promote within Men Engage, to include accountability in our formal organizational policies and practices. There you can see the how does it look like, the accountability standard and guidelines, and the training toolkit that I mentioned before. And we'll have it ready in a few days in our website for you to download, and we can also share the link for that. Within I already mentioned about our principles. The code of conduct that I mentioned before as well are more concrete ways to make sure that we really practice what we preach, as was mentioned actually, and also this is a good way to start a conversation among ourselves. If we perceive that if some of us are not really following these commitments, these principles in our work, in our everyday practices. And I want to refer to the standards in particular. We came up with these standards for promoting accountability within our organization. There are in total 12 standards. The number one is the responsibility of leaders within the Men Engaged Alliance in promoting accountability. Number two is the openness of the Men Engaged Alliance to publicize how to submit concerns or complaints regarding the behavior of their members and the commitments to respond effectively to these issues. This is very, very important, and we are very open and announce and share with everybody that if there is any concerns or complaint about how we do our work, in terms of our approach, what we are doing, or the individual behavior of members of the Men Engaged Alliance, and that people can hold us accountable, directly reaching out to us and informing what are the specific mechanisms, who can you write to or call to report any concern that you have about our work. Number three, the collaboration and the open dialogue with women's rights organizations is, of course, a critical component of accountability. And we, in the standards, we mentioned three specific mechanisms. One is the inclusion of at least 2 women's rights organizations in the Men Engaged steering committees. Other is holding at least two meetings in the same year with women's rights organizations and other key stakeholders. Also is joining women's-led network and initiatives. So 3 different concrete mechanisms to maintain as part of our ongoing work, the dialogue and the collaboration with women's rights organizations. Number 4 is the partnership with women's rights organizations to consult with them when Men Engaged Network are planning new programs or initiatives. So in addition to these formal biannual meetings, if we are developing, let's just say, a new campaign or a new training program in one specific country or region, we with this standard we are saying we have to consult with important constituencies, with women's organization, or if the campaigns has to do with youth organizations, in order to make sure that we are really representing correctly the interests of these groups. Also, number 5 is the dissemination and capacity building on accountability and on the mechanism to promote accountability. So number 5 is directly linked with this other tool, the training toolkit, that we have to facilitate tools for people to learn, to reflect, to develop their skills of how to promote accountability within the networks. The adoption of institutional policies that reflects respect for and commitment to an equitable work environment. So we recommend here specifically about sexual harassment policies, about policies against, specific policies within organizations that reflect what we are striving for. Even some recommended policies like paternity leave that are in many of the countries are not endorsed by the national laws, we recommend within the organization, if possible, to include these policies to promote men's participation in their, when they're, in the case of father who are having children. Also policies related to prevent physical punishment of children within the organization, and educate staff about the relationship with children. So different policies that we are recommending to be included in the organization that are part of the network. The dissemination of these policies, the promotion of women leadership within engaged networks and organizations. I had mentioned that before. Number 9, the fulfillment of international ethical standards when engaged organizations conduct social research. Many of our organizations do surveys, do community focal groups and other ways of collecting information from communities. So there are ethical responsibilities, of course, in doing this kind of research intervention. And finally, it's important that our code of conducts are signed by the member, physically signed, and it's a mechanism to hold each other accountable, and also the active participation of engaged members in trainings, and the promotion of critical self-reflections among engaged members. So these are the 12 standards that we are promoting, and that also is incorporated in the training toolkit to be learned and improved. Thank you.
Thank you, Oswaldo.
Great. So maybe just touching on your question on policy, on maybe capital P policy. So thinking back to the MENengage symposium in Delhi earlier in November, I encourage everyone to take a look at the Delhi call to action, which is online on MENengage, and I think there's some really great terminology that's being used. So I think it's all there. There's a spirit of, solidarity and inclusive approach, joint actions, across sectors, among social justice movements. So I think it's really about illustrating what those look like in practice and linking, well-intended language and policies to tangible results and gender equitable behaviors. So just being cognizant on time, I'll end it there.
Kate, thank you. And Ashley and Oswaldo, thank you very much. There's been a couple of panelists, there have been a couple of questions or comments with regard to financial accountability and navigating in that arena as it relates to supporting the work of engaging men and boys, but also not burdening women or being a drain or a burden on the fiscal support of women's organizations and women's work in this area. So what are your thoughts, panelists, on the financial accountability as it sits within the discussion here today? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad to see this issue come to the forefront. I think it's absolutely essential. Our perspective is really around creating new resources for male engagement work, as opposed to just within a small pie. So it's the creation of additional funds, as well as joint proposal writing, and really going in on this together, and resource sharing. So it's never about taking resources from women's organizations who are seeing themselves in a very scarce funding environment. And so we've struggled with this in some ways with the Community Practice Project, as White Ribbon was the main coordinator. So there wasn't kind of concrete resource sharing. So, really wanted to be cognizant and sensitive of that, and of people's time and commitment. But thank you for bringing that up, and I hope that we continue that that discussion and focus, because I think it's the crux of accountability really as well.
Yeah, and for me, this is really similar to what I think should be happening in a lot of movements and a lot of social justice work and racial justice work and work around class and ability and a lot of justice movements, is that kind of from a different perspective, is that we see a lot of money coming to engaging men work. We see a lot of job opportunities, a lot of speaking opportunities, just a lot of opportunities to gain resources from doing this work. And I will say that the people who actually are on this web conference right now and who I have seen do the most accountability, is the only way I can be the most accountable around financials in engaging men work, are the ones who say, just as those of us who hold race privilege should be saying when we're offered opportunities there, is that, yes, I could do this, but I'm not necessarily the right person for this. I could easily say yes to this opportunity and go do it, but it's hard. But I've seen it happen, and believe me, there are men who are doing this, who are saying, I could do it, but hey, I think that this woman actually would be great for this, and really passing those opportunities on. So it's about not just making room at the table, but sometimes stepping away from the table as well.
Yeah, I want to briefly comment as well. So important point to the issue of resources. We have to be use those resources really efficiently. I think it's an important component of accountability regarding financial resources, and also we have to be aware of make sure that the funds that we are applying for are not a distraction, a diversion of the funds that originally were intended for working with women or girls. So that's a commitment, and as Kate mentioned in her intervention, we also strive for joint efforts to increase the amount of resources for working with women and girls and boys and men, and for also integrated inclusive interventions at community or country or higher levels. So we and keep the conversation and stay aware that these are risks, and stay aware of the risk of taking advantage of this fashion of engaging men and boys, and not benefiting from them, but being aware of that and making sure that most of the resource, and supporting that most of the resource from donors, for instance, for the traditional donors, should continue going to the work with women and girls, and using some part, not the maximum part, but some part to engage men and boys as a complementary strategy to achieve gender equality.
Oswaldo, thank you. I'm cognizant of the time, panelists, and I would like each of you to be able to share some parting comments or thoughts. There's been some great comments and questions that have been introduced by the attendees today, and many of them have been very appreciative of your concrete examples that you've given within your own organization and your own work around conceptualizing men's accountability. So thank you for sharing those. But as we wind down here, we have about 5 minutes left, and I would like to provide each of you the opportunity to make that a final comment, call to action, motivation from you, some final thoughts, and then I have about 30 to 45 seconds worth of information to end today's webinar. So I will let Kate, Ashley, and Oswaldo give us provide us with some final thoughts from our discussion here today. So in any order.
Okay, my call to action would be that I encourage you all to take a look at our proposals for accountability standards and guidelines, and our specific proposal for a training toolkit on accountability, and give us your feedback about these materials. And even more, if you can organize some sessions on accountability discussions using our training toolkit, that would be great. And also to receive your inputs. We want to improve that toolkit. Actually, we also want organizations from different countries say, we want to create our own toolkits. This is good, but this is too basic, and we want something more developed. So that would be the maximum success for us, that people use this just as an initial start for putting this more in more concrete ways. So please use them, and let's stay in touch to see how we can improve these tools.
Okay. So for me, I have two things. I think one is that there's a lot of fear around, I would say, accountability. I mean, engaging men has become such a kind of powerful and odd strategy these days that I think that there is a lot of fear about criticizing it, about criticizing the work that we're seeing happening around engaging men, about criticizing maybe those who are engaging in these efforts. And I think that for me, you know, what is kind of an individual call to action, but is this idea that we really can't afford to be afraid, because again, if we're looking for impact, if we're looking for effectiveness, then with every strategy that we do when we're trying to prevent gendered violence, we have to, those of us who can, right, be willing to take that stand and say that thing people aren't going to want to hear, and make that criticism that, yeah, it might make me feel uncomfortable because people might be upset with me or have reactions that, you know, oh, I feel bad because this person didn't like what I said. But to me, that can't matter, because if we're trying to promote gender equity, we have got to do it well. And, you know, this Patrick Lemon always says to me, and I say that because he's on here, is, you know, really working, assume good intent. And so if we assume that we're all out there to do the best that we can, then there will be room for critique. And it won't be this huge, horrible thing that's happening. It will be something that's essential so we can move forward in this work and so we can do it well. The second thing that I would say is just to maybe listen to and sit with the words of an individual who identifies as a man who I work with, who said to me fairly recently, you know, I'm not in this to be a man doing engaging men work, is essentially what he said. He said, I'm in this to be a man working towards gender equity. And so just, you know, we can see that idea that it's not about being a man who's known for, who's doing engaging men work. It's about being a man who is working towards gender equity. And that's the goal.
Great. So yeah, just wrapping up, I love the focus on call to action. So I think just keeping this conversation going for folks in this field to really be self-reflective, really at a personal, individual level, and within their organizations and policy. And really to recognize this is a long-term, ongoing accountability journey, if you will. I think there's a tendency to really maybe rush through and think that we have it. But I do think accountability is based on relationship building, on trust, that really needs to be fostered on a long-term basis. So yeah, I encourage us to keep engaged in the accountability dialogue.
Thank you, Kate. I have one slide here. Before we say our final parting words here to close this webinar, just remind there will be a post of this, a link on our webinar, on our website, excuse me, that will have the recording of today's webinar for your listening and viewing after today. Again, please visit our website, the NAMEN website at namen.wildapricot.org to look at upcoming activities and events. And would like to thank the attendees, those of you who logged on and joined us today. I also want to finally thank our panelists, Kate Bojan, Ashley Meyer, and Oswaldo Montoya. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to share your thoughts and perspective on the conceptualizing and implementing men's accountability. I'd also like to thank again our steering committee and also the program working group with John Bernard, Aaron Casey, Tess Cody, Michael Fleming, and Shane Joseph, Rob Oken, and Feng Tao. So with that, we are concluding here. We are actually out of time. But again, look for the link on the NAMEN website. And again, thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.